Hey guys, I know a lot of you are really interested in learning about off-camera flash photography as it pertains to portraiture. And in this video, I want to cover some basics to get you started. I'll also link to some of my other videos in case you need more detail about certain aspects of what we'll be talking about today. But this is going to be a good introduction to help you get familiar with one light photography. Let's get into it. Why one light? All right, now everybody wants to use multiple lights. You want to buy a lighting kit and just get to work. And I understand that there's a lot of really sophisticated things you can do with multiple lights. But the thing is, we always want to start out with one light. This is really the best way to start learning about portrait lighting. See, one light is really, it's the foundation of any portrait lighting setup. It doesn't make sense to try to learn how to use several lights, all with different purposes, until you really know what that first light can and can't do. That first most important light is called the key light. And the key light, this is the light that most defines your subject's appearance. When you place this light, how you pose your subject relative to this light, and of course the light's modifier and the power settings and exposure, camera exposure settings with regard to the light. These are the most important factors with most portraits. This one light, the key light, this is the most important light in your lighting setup. And really, sometimes this is the only light that you need to create a portrait. All other lights play a supporting role. Other lights are called things like the fill light, the hair light, the rim light, the background light. And these can be made up of multiple lights and can be used really in any combination to create all sorts of effects. But they're just supporting the key light when it comes down to it. Again, the key light is the most important light in your setup. All right, so understanding light for photography. There's lots of things to learn about light and how it behaves and its properties and things like that. We're not going to cover everything here, but I did want to cover some basics. Let's talk about the types of light, all right? So we've got natural light, which we normally think of as sunlight. It's just the most natural light. It's there every day. Everybody knows what it looks like. That's natural light. Just think of sunlight. Then there's constant or continuous lights. Those would be indoor lights or hot lights. Think of constant or continuous lighting as something that lasts longer than a typical exposure. Okay, so all of this is in the context of photography, right? So constant light is light that is illuminating something for more than, say, a fraction of a second. This could be room lighting. When you think of room lights, you're thinking of lamps or overhead lights. This could be photography hot lights or LED lights, or lights that you just stay on while you're using them to do some photos. Video lights, those are an example of continuous lights. And then we have flash or strobe lights, which are you could describe them as instantaneous. These create instantaneous bursts of light. These lights illuminate your subject or your scene for a duration that is much shorter than a typical exposure. Okay, so the constant lights last much longer than a typical exposure, and flash or strobe lighting is much shorter in duration than a typical exposure. But flash is so bright that, in an instant, a flash burst is usually plenty of light for a good exposure. And that's why we like to use flash. It's very powerful and very flexible. And it's available no matter what your ambient lighting conditions are or the time of day. As long as you've got flash with you, you can do just about anything you want to. You control the light in that situation. All right, so we'll quickly go over a couple of other things regarding the behavior and quality of light. Light moves on straight paths. Something important to know. You might think, okay, well, that's obvious. But it's a really important concept to understand as you move forward. Also understand that even though it moves on straight paths, it will reflect off surfaces and it will bounce around. And that's something you can find very useful in certain situations. Also, light can appear harsh or soft, and this is often determined by the use of modifiers. It's also determined by the distance between the subject and the light itself and the relative size of the light. And these are part of the many other things that you're going to want to learn as you progress. Things like how light becomes much less intense as distance from the light to what it's striking increases, and that's light fall off. And you can get very detailed and scientific about it when you talk about something called the inverse square law. That's brought up a lot in when you're getting into the advanced topics of lighting. And you're also going to want to understand how the size of a light relative to your subject is important. Okay, now to the fun stuff, the hands-on stuff. Your one light setup. What's it going to consist of? You're going to need some basic gear. And the gear that you need is really going to depend on a lot of different factors. But generally speaking, you're going to want a flash or strobe. That just makes sense, right? And it could be helpful to get one that allows you to not only use it in TTL mode, which can make things easy, but you're also going to want to be able to put that flash or strobe in manual mode, because eventually you're going to have to use manual mode, manual settings with your flash in order to do any really good professional work. You're going to want a light stand. This is what you mount your flash and flash bracket on in your modifier. Everything sits on the light stand, so you're going to want a good light stand. And this is going to make it possible for you to place that light anywhere in your scene, anywhere around your subject that you want it to be, and it's going to make it possible to elevate the light or lower the light to the level that you need it to be. Sometimes your subject is sitting on a stool, sometimes they're standing, and there's different things you're going to want to do, different places that you're going to want to position that light. You're going to do that using the light stand. You're going to need a mounting bracket, and in this picture here you can see that the mounting bracket that we're using is an S-type bracket. This is a really good one to use. I have some videos on that. Actually, I've got videos on just about everything we're talking about here. This is kind of a general overview of things, but definitely take a look at some of the other videos that I will link to in the description. Now, this bracket is something that you're going to place your flash unit. You can see the flash unit is sitting here sort of horizontally instead of being mounted on the camera. That's why it's off-camera flash. So you place your flash in this bracket, you tighten down the tightening knob, and it secures the flash. So that's holding the flash for you there at the top. The bottom part of that bracket you can see is mounted to the light stand. And another thing that you're going to need is, and one of the reasons to even have this is so that you can use a modifier, and that would be, in this case, an umbrella, but you can also mount a softbox to a flash bracket like this. And to get any of this to work remotely, you're going to need a flash trigger that's compatible with the flash and your camera, and all of that gear works together so that you can control the flash from your camera position. Now, one of the things that you're going to need to control as far as your flash goes is the light power and settings of that flash or that strobe. Now right here I've got a picture of a Westcott FJ400 strobe, and it operates pretty much, it's just a big flash is what it is, and you can see it has its own mounting bracket built in. So this is how you mount it, just directly to the light stand, and you can tilt and angle this strobe just like you could if you're using a flash with a swivel bracket like we showed in the previous picture. And you can also attach an umbrella or some other kind of modifier. You can attach a softbox to this flash. Right now it's just got a sort of a what they call a reflector. It's just a little metal piece that helps direct the light straight ahead. Now, as far as light and power settings go, with a flash like this or a strobe like this, you can use it in TTL mode. And if you do, you're going to want to use your camera in manual mode. That's what I recommend if you're doing portraits where someone's just sitting for you. In other words, the setup that you're doing is a regular portrait setup. You've got someone sitting there, things aren't moving around too much, you're not on the run. This isn't run and gun shooting, this is sit down, actual photo shoot, an actual photo shoot kind of situation. So you're gonna have your camera in manual mode, even if you're using your flash in TTL mode. This can be a really simple way to do this because the flash power is gonna automatically be adjusted for you as you go. That's what TTL does, even if your camera's in manual mode, which again, it should be. So eventually you're going to want to learn manual flash. Okay, so you're going to take that off of TTL mode and control the flash power manually. You're going to decide what flash power you're going to use in your setup. Again, you're in this situation, your camera's going to be in manual mode and your flash is going to be in manual mode, and you determine the flash setup. This is a really good way to shoot because you're going to control everything, and your photos are going to have a consistent look throughout. With TTL, sometimes TTL can get a little confused. It's not very consistent, so your exposures, your flash illumination is going to be maybe sometimes a little different from shot to shot, and you don't really want that. That's why eventually manual flash is the way to go. What settings you'll use, like I can't sit here and tell you right now, okay, well, when you shoot with manual, make sure you use this setting or that setting. It all varies, okay? It's based on a variety of factors, including distances, so like the distance between the flash and the light and the subject. A lot of it's going to depend on the flash our strobe unit itself, because full power on a small flash might be half power on a larger flash. Another thing that's going to determine, your settings are going to be the modifier, because the modifier will often cut down on the light coming out of the flash. It might cut it down by a stop or two. Your camera settings are going to depend a lot on the power settings you have for the flash, and vice versa. To understand what settings you need for a given situation, you're really going to need to learn a little bit more about how all of that works. I would recommend that you pick up my guide to flash photography, because it's going to teach you all of that stuff. It's going to go into detail, and it's a handy reference covering all these important topics. It covers how light works in photography, which we've gone over a little bit here, but this will get into more detail. And it'll give you a really solid foundation in understanding the behavior of light as it affects photography and your portraiture. So you're going to be able to understand camera and flash exposure after reading this. You're going to learn all about flash gear and concepts, on-camera flash techniques, which is very important, because you can actually take some really good portraits with on-camera flash, and of course, off-camera flash techniques. So this is something that I suggest that you grab. There will be a link below, so go ahead and check that out. Lighting placement, I'm going to give you a very easy place to start. This will cover you most of the time. This is probably 90% of the time, this is where I start with my light with any portrait setup. You're going to place your light with the modifier. In this illustration I've got here, you've got a softbox on it, pretty decent sized softbox. This is a medium sized softbox. And you're going to place your light not directly in front of your subject for the most part. For the standard setup, what I do is take that light, I keep it in front of the subject, but move it over to the side about 45 degrees off of the camera to subject axis. So again, that light is not between you and the subject, it's moved over to the side. Still in front, but off to the side about 45 degrees, either to the left or to the right. You're going to want that light a little above the subject's head. That's a more natural position. You definitely don't want it below the subject, because then you'll get that kind of that monster lighting. It's very dramatic, and it really isn't very flattering. So we always place the light, at least for starters, up above the subject's head a little bit, and then angled down toward the subject. And if you are going for kind of a softer look, which is what most people want because it's flattering, you're going to want to keep that light about 2 or 3 feet away from the subject's face, depending on the size of the light. I mean, if it's a really huge modifier, a really huge softbox, then you can move it farther away. But for the most part, if that softbox is about 2 or 3 feet wide, then keep it about 2 or 3 feet away from the subject's face. That's a good rule of thumb. And then you'll have it. Again, about 90% of your portraits can be done this way. A lot of the look after this is going to depend on the angle of the subject's head, of their face. And that's going to give you the different lighting patterns that most of us are familiar with. And let's just talk about this real quick. The traditional portrait lighting patterns. There are 5 traditional portrait lighting patterns. Some people say there are 4. Some people say maybe there's 6. But they're, in my experience, there are 5 main portrait lighting patterns. You can call these styles or techniques. The reason that we even talk about these is not because you want to specifically use any given portrait lighting pattern, especially something traditional, something that's been around for years. Not that's your goal. It's just that we've identified these as the way that people are used to seeing human faces illuminated, either when there's, by the sun, by natural light, when they're outside, when they're inside. Where are lights always positioned, and how is a human's face always positioned when you're looking at them? And you're going to get one of these looks, and we'll go over them in a minute. These are just established guidelines. They're not actually rules. And the reason that we talk about them is because learning these will make you a better portrait photographer. You're going to practice how to create these looks, and it's going to be like your kung fu of photography. This is going to be something that you will rely on even when you're not thinking about it. Just learning how to do this, just practicing how to get these portrait lighting patterns. Just learning how to do them is just going to inform you, even sometimes without you thinking about it, maybe subconsciously, whether you're going in the right direction or not, or if something looks off in a portrait, you're going to know why, because you've learned how faces are supposed to be illuminated, how we've gotten used to it over the years, what looks right, what doesn't look right, and why. By the way, this picture here is illuminated in what we call a broad light pattern, which is not something I always do, but sometimes it works. You break your own rules. Here are the traditional portrait lighting patterns. We've got short, broad, which I just talked about, split, butterfly, and Rembrandt lighting. Okay, so all of these have a different look. Now, the short lighting is probably the most popular, the most useful, and it's a flattering kind of light. Now, if you make sure to pick up the guide that I am recommending that you grab, the Ed Vorosky's Guide to Flash Photography, it'll go into detail about how to do each of these portrait lighting patterns. But the short, for example, is the one that people, I think they generally like to start off with that one. And I should have said from the start that these examples are all done with one light, because again, one light is, your key light is the most important light. It defines the look, and then you bring in other lights to kind of augment it or enhance things. But these lighting patterns are based on your key light. Okay, so you've got the short light. The broad light is sort of the opposite of the short light. It brings the light around to the other side if the subject still has their face oriented in the same position. The broad light lights the side of the face that is showing more surface area towards the camera. And the short light does the opposite. Now, this split light is just what it sounds like. It sort of splits the light and shadow in half across the subject's face. Then you've got the butterfly light, which is made popular by Hollywood. And the reason they call it a butterfly light is because some people think that the shadow created under the nose kind of looks like a butterfly. But this is an interesting light. It was used for starlets, Hollywood starlets, and it's just a light almost directly above and to the front of the subject, creating this shadow pattern. It sort of brings out the face, heightens certain features of the face, like the cheekbones, brings the face out from. You can see how the shadow falls below the face towards the neck. So it's very, a very face-heavy kind of light. Then you have the Rembrandt light, which is sort of the classic old masters look. This pattern is kind of denoted by the way that the shadow falls from the nose across the cheek, and you get sort of a little triangle shape of light under the shadow side, the eye on the shadow side. And so, again, really the whole point of this particular look is that it looks very classical. Okay, so these are the traditional portrait lighting patterns that I really think that you should learn. Once you learn how to do these and do them on demand and just, effectively, you pretty much have it down. It's pretty much time to move on. And that is where we're going to end this with the next steps. Okay, what are you going to do from here on out? You're going to practice the 5 traditional lighting patterns and get really good at them. You're going to learn about exposure, especially how to use manual exposure when you're doing your portraits with your one light. And once you do that, you're going to add a second light to your setup. This will more than likely be a fill light, maybe a hair rim light or a background light. You're just going to experiment. You're going to add one more light because you understand what to do with your main light at that point, your key light. So you can proceed on with total confidence at that point. Now, there's really a lot more to learn on this topic, including how to use different types of light, knowing when it's best to employ TTL or manual control over your flash, and just getting comfortable with having real people pose for you, learning how to build rapport, and how to work with your subject under that light. There's a lot to learn, but again, this is a good introduction, I think. This is a starting place for you. I know I threw a lot at you at this point, but really this is only the very basics, and there's so much more to learn from here on out. I hope you've enjoyed this introductory mini course on one light flash portraiture. Again, don't forget to download my guide. It's a great way to have a quick reference on you at all times as you continue to learn all about flash photography. The link to that guide is in the description below. Okay, guys, that's about all I've got for you today. Have a great one, and I'll see you next time.